A warm welcome to Mike. Thanks so much for making the time for us. Mike has a massive experience of teaching people how to use storytelling skills so that we can captivate our audience and create impact. And he does it for a living. It will be interesting, Mike, to hear as well a bit about your background in terms of what led you to storytelling. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. Yeah, it looks like it's a small group of us, so in a way that could be good for you guys. More time perhaps spending in chit-chatting group. But yeah, okay, since you asked about my background, as a matter of fact, that comes in right at the start. So I'll just jump into it for telling you about me. Nope, that didn't work. There we go. So just a background about me. I studied expressive arts therapy and I studied public relations. I was a tour guide in Vancouver, BC. I worked for cruise ships as a social host and event manager. I did art therapy with children in schools and worked with Syrian refugees. And I've told stories on stage at all sorts of events in Vancouver. I've been a regular at the competition for the Storytelling Slam and made it to the finals the last 3 years. I'm a regular at the Toronto Storytelling Festival. I collect folktales, mythology from around the world, and I've hosted lots of workshops in schools and with businesses and organizations and stuff like that. So the question I'll ask you right off the get-go is, who found that introduction to be extremely captivating?
Me.
Does anyone think that they'll remember anything from that in years to come?
I definitely took a note that there exists something called a storytelling slam and a storytelling festival. And it's not as a joke. That's something that I definitely will look into because that's very intriguing to
They
me.
are a lot. They are a lot of fun.
And what caught
So
my attention?
that's what's that? Sorry.
What caught my attention was I don't know if I've ever heard, if I'm too how familiar I am with storytelling trauma.
Storytelling
That's
drama.
that's,
Well,
that's
yeah,
very interesting. Yeah.
it exists definitely. All right. What I'm going to do is, for me, of course, there's some things that are of interest in there, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you another type of introduction about myself. That was take one, and now I'm going to do a take two. So I'm going to tell you another introduction now. And I'm going to tell you about the time that I found magic. And it happened in a place I least suspected, Morocco. I stepped off a bus and into a busy marketplace. There's stalls, vendors lined up on both sides of me. Everybody shouting at me, my friend over here, cashews, figs, no, over here, dates, pistachios. And as I go through the marketplace, following the stalls, I'm passing by these big piles of fruits and spices, and I could smell everything of cardamom and cinnamon and curry. And as I zigzag, the pathway curves and gets narrower, and suddenly I'm in the shoe section with shoes everywhere above me, dangling. I take a turn and I'm suddenly in the wicker basket section, everything with wicker basket dangling everywhere. I take another turn and rugs are piled high. I'm suddenly in the rug section of the market. And it narrows and winds and twists and turns, and it's a maze. And it's quite literally a maze, actually, because this is the old city, the old Medina, which was designed at a time when, if barbarians attacked, a maze meant that locals would know their way around, but invaders would not. And so it gets narrow and narrow, but then suddenly it opens into this gigantic marketplace, a giant square, a huge square, the Jimalfna Square, it's called, over 1,000 years old and full of life. There's acrobats and sword swallowers and men with monkeys on their shoulders, people playing djembes. And I'm wandering around taking it all in because I've never seen anything like this before. Nothing in any North American society anyway. To me, it felt like something out of the Arabian Nights. I don't know if maybe perhaps some of you are living in a place like that, but for me, it was extremely exotic. But then something caught my eye. I see this little circle of people, And most of them are younger guys, young Arab men wearing these white robes. And some of them are standing, some are kneeling, some are sitting, but all of them are leaning with this grin on their face. And at the center of this circle is this old man. He's short with a beard, graying beard, and he's wearing the little white traditional Moroccan hat and a white robe. And he's got a big smile and he's animated. His hands are going around. And I don't understand what's going on. So I wander over. And it's all in Arabic, a language I don't understand. But I could tell from his movements, he's telling a story. And by the expressions in all the people, I could tell that he's a master of what he's doing. And I watch as he starts to build and get louder and bigger until his arms are up in the air and he reaches some sort of a climax. And suddenly he stops and he lowers his hands and he takes a step backwards and he looks down at the ground. And in front of him on the ground is this small brass pot. And as he's looking at it, all of the young men who had been listening, they all reach into their pockets and they pull out bills and coins and they're putting it in the pot. And the old man is watching. And when he was happy that everybody had put in, then and only then did he continue the story. And in that moment, I knew I had to tell stories. It was magic to me. So that's my second introduction. So my question to you guys is, there's the obvious, of course, I told a story in the second, but what were the differences? What do you notice in those two introductions?
In the first one, I was reading through and trying to extract meaning. And the second one, you provided the context and I did not have to extract meaning. I just had to listen.
Yeah.
And pay attention, which was there because it was captivating. And I did not take any notes because it was colorful enough that it would stay with me.
Yeah, totally. What did you feel while you were taking it in?
I was imagining the street, and when you mentioned the curvy streets and the anecdote that was so that the invaders would find it difficult. That just took me on a tangent of thinking, that explains why the streets are that way in most of the neighborhoods in the suburbs in North America.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for sharing that. Anyone else have anything they want to add to that? Things they noticed between the two?
You go.
No, please go ahead.
No, you go for it. I'll go after.
Sure. I'm just going to say, forgive the pun, but they're dramatically different.
For sure. But what can you pull out anything from that?
I've seen 100 resumes before. I've seen 100 spec sheets before. 100 is undercutting it. Of just, this is the speaker, the keynote speaker, and here are a few bullets on where they've been before. But to hear a story like that is a completely different introduction. That is a standout. I've never gotten an introduction before like that.
And what does that do for you, though? How did it feel to have a different introduction like that?
It's memorable, if nothing else. I've always wanted to go to Morocco. I continue to be intrigued by Morocco, and now I'm interested in more of what you have to say, because I'm expecting a very vivid picture of everything else that's going to come out of your mouth, essentially.
Great. Sounds like a success to me.
Good.
Marina, did you have something you wanted to add? Thank you, Kyle, for sharing that.
Yeah, aside from what Kyle said, now you feel like you want to hear what else you've got to say. I found that with the second way you introduced yourself, it was captivating. It felt like I was able to go through that experience with you, in a sense. Whereas with the first one, I was, oh, cool, like he did that. Oh, that's cool. But you can't grasp what that would have, I guess, felt like, or what the experience would have been like.
Right. Great. Thank you for sharing that. Did you guys feel that you could imagine a little bit about what the second one might have looked like? Yeah. Quite different from the first one. Now, I should add as well that doesn't mean that the first one is all bad, because it's just different. It gives you different bits of information.
I think for me, the second one, especially, you seem to make it personal. More of a personal story, like you wanted to tell it, you experienced it, maybe wanted to own it. So personalized in that sense, as opposed to just telling it.
And you're absolutely correct. Yeah. I love telling that story. And so what I'll do is I'll share my screen again, and I'm going to, my sort of goal for the first little bit here is to prove to you guys why you should care about storytelling. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background. I'm going to fly through it because my goal isn't to give you a history lesson on storytelling. It's more just to make a point of why it's valuable no matter what you're doing. And I'll give you a few examples, and then later on we're going to go into an activity. So let me share. There we go. So storytelling, the very beginning here, cave paintings. That's the start of storytelling. It's for tens of thousands of years, we are wired for stories. Then we got into mythology, stories that people use to explain the world. What we use as science today, that's what myths did. And they're still with us today. I'm sure you all know many of the Greek myths, but they got passed on from generation to generation, and they lasted because of how captivated we are by stories. Aesop's fables. I'm sure you've all heard The Tortoise and the Hare and the Boy Who Cried Wolf. Anyone know how old Aesop's fables are? Any guesses? No, no guesses.
No idea.
Aesop's fables are 2,600 years old. Aesop was a slave in ancient Greece, and we're still telling his stories. That's how powerful his words were. So more in modern times, Winston Churchill, and by the way, some of these versions of how I'm talking about using storytelling might not have been what you thought of use of storytelling, but Winston Churchill totally convinced England to go to war against Germany. They were ready to make a deal with Hitler. He gave a speech that was 180 words of mostly one-syllable words, because he believed politicians should do that, and totally changed the outcome of the war and pretty much history. JFK in the States, he had a vision story. He said to the American public, before this decade is out, we are going to send a man to the moon and safely return him. Because of those powerful words, the entire nation got behind it. A few years after that, he went to NASA doing the presidential thing, shaking hands. He met a janitor. He asked the janitor, what do you do here? The janitor said, I'm helping send a man to the moon. That's how powerful those words were. Martin Luther King, boy, was he an orator, one of the greatest storytellers of all time. His famous speech, the I Have a Dream one, most of it, if you watch the video, he starts off reading, and by the end, he's just going. He goes off script, and he's just ad-libbing. Probably the most famous speech of our time. He did ad hoc like that. Powerful words, but also it can be used for evil. How do you convince a nation of otherwise intelligent, rational people to change their whole belief system? Well, Hitler was a good storyteller too. So storytelling can go both ways. With great power comes great responsibility, right? Yeah, the politics side of it. So this little sculpture comes from a great story that I love. It was somebody from a magazine in New York who want to know just how much of an impact can storytelling have? How much can you convince people to be interested in something just by adding a story? And so he went to thrift stores and he collected 200 objects. He spent $125 on 200 objects, random little knickknacks like this one. Then he recruited 200 authors and he asked each one of them to write a story, just a fictional story for each object. Then he posted them on eBay to see what they would go for. This little figurine he bought for $1. It sold on eBay with a story, even though they added at the bottom that it was fictional, with the story it sold for $104.50. As a percentage increase, that's pretty remarkable. And this was not isolated. The 200 objects bought for $125 sold for over $6,000. That's pretty big, pretty good increase. Do any of you know who this is? No? Usually I do this workshop in Canada here, and every Canadian usually knows who this is.
He's the astronaut, the Canadian astronaut.
Yeah, he ran the International Space Station, and he's a big celebrity in Canada. And so his story was that he was a little boy in 1969 when they stepped on the moon. And of course, that was televised and everybody's watching it, right? That's the event of the century. And a young Chris Hadfield at 9 years old watches this and says, I'm going to become an astronaut. And so he goes into engineering and aeronautics and aviation and all the relevant fields. The problem was, though, in those days, Canada didn't have a space program. Now, the moon mission was huge bucks, and Canada's not the US. But undeterred, it kept going into relevant fields. Finally, 1992, Canada launches the Canadian Space Agency. They open it up to applications, and tons of applications come in, over 5,000. They narrow it down to the top 20 people. They get invited to the capital, Ottawa, and go through a bunch of tests. But we're talking the cream of the crop by the time they've narrowed it down. The best astronauts in the country. And so they all do great on the tests. But one of those tests was a mock press conference. Canada didn't have the budget that NASA did. Whoever was an astronaut also had to be able to speak to the public. And Chris Hadfield had done public speaking and storytelling, and he's head and shoulders above the rest. And so he was chosen. And when he got to the International Space Station, he brought the International Space Station to YouTube. People had lost interest before him in NASA and space travel. He reinvigorated the entire industry. I don't know if any of you saw his videos, but he would do things like what happens when you crack an egg in space. And he brought his guitar with him and he sang Space Oddity, which has like millions of views. His abilities and skills and education got him to Ottawa, but his ability to tell a story was what got him to space. So, my point here, one of the points of why I include this is because it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Storytelling's part of it. You might not have thought, oh, astronaut, what does he care about storytelling? A lot. All right, so here's a question for you. Ignoring a little bit of trying to predict where I'm going with this, in a typical marketing sales pitch for a laptop, what do you think some of the typical things somebody would want to include? Just shout out something, a typical thing you would expect to see if somebody was selling a laptop.
Sleek, light.
The color, is that what I got? Sorry, I couldn't hear you, Kyle.
Sorry, the specifications.
Yeah, specifications. CPU speed, RAM, hard drive, this sort of things you'd expect. So I'm going to introduce you to one, in my opinion, and the opinion of many who understand him this way, one of the best storytellers of all time. And it'll probably surprise you who I'm going to say here, and that is Steve Jobs. You probably wouldn't think of him as a storyteller, but this is a quote of his: "The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come." And do any of you know what company he was working with when he said this? Any guesses?
Pixar.
Yeah, that's right, Pixar. Yeah, Steve Jobs stepped in to save Pixar, who is, I think, one of the best storytellers out there today. But everything he did was storytelling. With Apple, the way he designed the computer, Macs were taller instead of wider, unlike their IBM counterparts, because he wanted people to see it so it looked like a head of a person instead of a machine that you couldn't approach. This is an era when you had to be a coder. You had to use DOS-based systems to use a computer, but he wanted everybody to be able to use a computer. And he did it through design storytelling. So totally different approach towards it. And there's so many Steve Jobs examples. I won't get into it too much, otherwise I'll keep talking about him, because he was a master. Even the little blinking light on the computers was his idea, because you don't power down a Mac. Macs go to sleep because they have human characteristics. So everything was a little bit of a story with him. So I'm going to show you how Steve Jobs advertised computers. So when he went back to Apple in the 90s, Apple was in trouble. I don't know how much you guys know about the background of Apple, but they were in serious trouble. It was not looking good. They brought Steve Jobs back and they introduced the iMac. And this is the ad that Steve Jobs put out.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
All right, so
Here's to
quite a different approach to selling a computer, isn't it? Now, Steve Jobs, he was very focused on why Apple was doing what it was doing. If any of you have seen Simon Sinek's talk on starting with your why, have any of you seen that, Simon Sinek? If not, I highly recommend it. It's a book, but he also does a very good job in his TED Talk. And Apple wasn't just selling computers, they were changing the world. They are changing the world. And that's why they've gone into all these other devices and arenas. But the way they communicate it to us is with their stories. And so that advertisement wasn't meant to sell computers. That advertisement was meant to get you on board for what Apple's on board for, which is changing the world. And yeah, Steve Jobs, everything he did was a story. And so when I gave you those introductions back at the start, one of the things that I did in the second iteration was telling you why I do storytelling, right? That's what the resume style introduction was missing. It didn't actually say anything about why I cared about storytelling, why I'm passionate about it. And in the second one, I did. It admitted some of the other things, but in favor of that, I gave you the feeling of why I love it. Okay, so another little video that I love here. Stories can also change people's behavior. And the quality of this video isn't very good, but you'll get the idea.
What did you do to my sign?
I wrote the saying, but in different words.
Thanks, love.
All right. So what do you think? What was it about the second one that made it more impactful?
Empathy.
Yeah, exactly. Suddenly, it's such a little tweak, but suddenly it's emotional. Suddenly we have empathy. Suddenly we care. Makes a pretty big difference. And in nonprofit world, that's something that we see a lot of companies that really depend completely on getting donations. And so years ago, this is an ad from Save the Children. Years ago, Save the Children was having a lot of trouble getting donations. And they were coming out with incredible statistics that they thought really spoke for themselves. In Malawi, there's 3 million, I'm making stuff up, there's 3 million children without drinking water, and there's 6 million adults that have no access to plumbing or whatever. Very big statistics. And to them, it felt like, shouldn't it be obvious that we get donations from this? But donations went down. The numbers were too big. The stats being thrown at people didn't actually make them care. Just like in that video we last saw, they were missing the emotion. And so what they realized eventually was what's generally known now as the story of one. They couldn't imagine 3 million people. And so what's their $20 do? It's drop in the bucket, and so forget it, move on. But once it was presented as, oh, this is Amelia is 12 years old, this is where she lives, this is her school, these are her parents, suddenly people started to care and donations started going up again, and by a very significant amount. And this is something that's been tested in studies time again. The donations are much, much higher with the story of one. So that's something you see a lot of in nonprofit world now. And it is something that, especially for industries, occupations that are very numbers oriented, a lot of people like to present stats because that's what we work with, that's what we know. By the way, I originally started in engineering, got away from it, very numbers oriented, but then it just doesn't work. People start tuning out. Stats are great. They give information, and I'm not saying you shouldn't use stats, but if you want people to care, you need something more than stats. So this is another nonprofit example. On the left there, that good looking hunk of a guy, that's Pete. And Pete was a all-star athlete. He was the kind of guy that whatever sport he picked up, he was instantly a star at. And everybody loved him. He was popular in high school, made it into baseball at college in Boston. And one day he's up at bat and a ball hits his hand goes limp. But then it doesn't recover. And giving it time, caring for it, and none of the doctors could figure out what was going on. And he's going to all these different specialists. Finally, a doctor calls him in and he says, I'm sorry to tell you this, Pete, but you have ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And Lou Gehrig's disease, no cure for it. It's usually comes in older people, not a young guy in college. And of course, it was devastating news for him and his family. But after a few hours, he sort of jumped up. He said, you know what? We're going to do something about this. We're going to make the world aware of this issue. Now, in the year before, in the 1 year before Pete found out about this, the ALS Foundation of America had only received $2 million in donations for the whole year, which is not much, especially when you look at what's coming in for donations to other diseases. You can't do too much these days with $2 million. So Pete happened to be the kind of person that ran for school president, was on the debate teams. He knew how to tell a story. He also knew how to leverage social media. He knew how to reach out to people. And he started, well, do any of you know what he started? The Ice Bucket Challenge. He got the Ice Bucket Challenge popularized by engaging everybody, by bringing awareness to it. And he had said, I forgot to mention a second ago, but when he was saying, all right, we're going to do something, his goal was to get the biggest philanthropist. He said, we're going to get Bill Gates. And so once he started the ice bucket, it went like wildfire, right? And eventually it made it to Bill Gates. In the 6-week campaign that he ran with the Ice Bucket Challenge, they raised $115 million compared to the previous year. That's what happens when you have an ambassador who knows how to tell a story. Yeah, this is a quote that I love. Some of you may have heard it before. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. That's the key here. If you want to get people on board, if you want people to participate in your project, whatever it is, organization, nonprofit, new type of knowledge, get them to feel something. It doesn't matter what kind of industry you're in. And actually, just for me, I'll tell you a quick story from my life, which is just over a year ago, I was working on a few projects, including some storytelling, and I didn't have much money coming in. So I was like, oh, I need a random job, just something to make some side cash with a flexible schedule. It happened to be the same time that Uber came to Vancouver. Vancouver was late getting on Uber. They just came last year, and they required a commercial license. And I was like, I happen to already have that license. So I was like, what the heck? It's not the highest status job, but I will be the only storyteller Uber driver. So I got myself all pumped about this job with my goal of telling stories to people. And so that's what I did. I would tell people folk tales. They get in and I'd say, you want to hear a story? And I'd tell them some traditional tale from somewhere in the world. And I'd practice my storytelling, but also funny things started to happen. And one time in particular, I pick up these two women, middle age, like 50s, Arab, and they got in the car and they were very low energy. They were very like heads down. I said hello. They said hello. After a minute, I said, would you like to hear a story? And one of them almost thought about it and said, okay. And I start telling this tale I know from Turkey. It's a beautiful story with a little bit of magic and generosity and sort of a pay it forward tale. And as I'm telling it, they're starting to liven up and get excited. They're starting to comment on the story that I'm telling. And I get to the end and they're beaming and happy. And one of them says to me, you have no idea what you just did for me. And she then explains that she was on her way to Vancouver General Hospital to get radiation for brain cancer. And I didn't even know where I was going. I hadn't looked at what my destination was, but sure enough, I pull into the little loop-de-loop at the hospital for the cancer ward of Vancouver General. And she said, thanks to hearing that story, I feel so much better. I feel so much more prepared to go into this. And she gave me a bunch of, they thanked me over. And I had no idea. It was just a random little, who knows what. You never know what kind of an impact that you might have. And when you tell a story, it's like you make a movie in somebody's head. And I'm sure you all experienced a bit as I've told you some of these stories, is your brain fills everything in and you start to create it just like a movie. But I think it's even better than anything Hollywood comes up with. Our imaginations are the most powerful of all. And so maybe, yeah, I was going to do, how many of us are there? 1, 2, 3, 5 of you guys. Okay. So let's do, I'm just checking the time to manage everything. Yeah, okay, let's just do 2 breakout groups. And the question for you is, why do you do what you do? And see if you could find a story that gets to your why a little bit, not just, oh, because I studied this, but some sort of a moment. And even if you just stumbled into what it is, and just for clarification too, it doesn't have to be your occupation. It could be a hobby, an interest, something you do in your spare time, anything. But a framework to think about it is there was before, and then something happened, and then an after. And before, it could just be that it wasn't in your life. And in my story I told at the beginning with Morocco, I wasn't into, I knew nothing of storytellers. I had this moment, that's what I'm calling this explosion, a moment where I found a storyteller and now stories are part of my life. And so this is just a 1 to 2 minute thing, pretty quick. You don't have to overthink this. If you play guitar, just maybe you have a moment where you saw a guitar player, if whatever it is, maybe you're a coach of a kids team or whatever. So whatever comes to you. And we'll just take a couple of minutes. Let's take 5 minutes or something and just try to make sure everybody has a go. So Abram, can you break it up?
Yep. Awesome.
Okay, it looks like everyone's back. How did that feel for you guys to hear a short why story, a purposeful story? Any thoughts?
I guess my only thought is really echoing what you were just saying. It really gives a lot of context. It's really just in a 2-minute run. It's really engaging. It paints a very different picture of a person in a short period of time.
Yeah, very different than a resume. Even just different than just stating something. Just me saying, "Oh, I tell stories," is very different from me telling you that quick little tale of Morocco.
Yep.
And I could have made that story even shorter. I could have started it right when I saw him in the square. It could have been a 30-second story. Okay. I'll share my screen again. All right. So I've got one more exercise that we're going to do. And this one, we are going to take an imaginary trip to this village in the Amazon. And so, simple little village, as you can see. These are personal photos from a village I actually was at in the Amazon. And we're going to imagine pretty much that the village is what you see here, and that in the main field, right at the front of the village here, suddenly one day, out of nowhere, there appears a machine. This random machine just shows up. How it got there, I have no idea. But we're going to do a little imagination exercise here. We're going to do another breakout group. And we're going to, just trying to think of how to do this. Abram, are you there? No.
Yep. Sorry, I just need to go to the bathroom.
Is there a way to put a timer, or is there a way to communicate with the groups so that we could come back together? Because this is just a multi-tiered exercise.
Yeah, you can, if you go to the chat, you can type for everyone, I think.
If I go to the chat, what?
You can send a message to everyone.
I can talk to everyone?
Yeah.
Okay. So this exercise has a few different steps to it. The first thing we're going to do, so I guess we'll do it in groups of 2, is what does the machine produce and how did it change things? And it could be absolutely anything. This is an imagination exercise, so maybe the machine produced, you know what, actually, I think to speed it up, I'm just going to give you guys something. It's going to be totally random. And I'm going to say for group, I think it titles them group 1 and 2, doesn't it? Do you know, Abram, if it gives the groups titles?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so for group 1, this machine suddenly appears with producing samosas. And the second group, the machine is suddenly going to produce ham radios. And so I just want you to have a quick discussion in your pairs of what changed in this village as a result of these things appearing, and try and think of it, I guess if you're familiar with systems thinking, try and think like down the line on all the different ways that it might have changed the world that you're in. So we'll just make this a 2-minute discussion. So Abram, would you mind throwing on the breakout groups?
Awesome, they're open now.
All right, we got two of you back. Okay,
All right.
so you guys got a bit of a sense of how things have changed. So now we're going to go on to the next part of the question and go right back into the groups. And the next part is I want you to think about this change by thinking about who it impacted. So remember the story of one we were talking about? So it's almost like for those of you who are familiar with UX, it's like a persona, right? It's think of an individual and how it impacted them. And same thing, take a couple minutes and see how many different ways you can come up with that it might have changed that from that individual's point of view. All right,
Yep.
Abram,
Cool.
breakout rooms.
All right. Dan, I'm gonna bring you into ours.
Sounds good.
Damn.
Hello.
Well, there we go. Got two of them back. It doesn't work so well without a timer, eh?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. I think we got them back. Okay. So next iteration of this. So same story, same person that it was impacted, but now what we're going to do is we are going to take it to the millionth degree. So what I mean by that is I want you to extrapolate. So in the story that I told you earlier of the woman with brain cancer, I guess an example would be like if she suddenly got cured and then decided to go into a nonprofit that raised money for brain cancer, and then ended up getting the funding that then led to the cure, and then ended up winning a Nobel Prize or whatever. So there's a little bit of imagination here. I want you to have fun with it, but take what you've already done and just imagine it to the nth degree, as far as you possibly.
We actually had a Nobel Prize winner in our story already.
Yeah, did you? Great,
Yeah.
use it. So then extrapolate it further. See what you can do. See where else that you can take it. Yeah. Have fun with it, and somebody try and keep an eye on the chat, maybe, because I'll have to bring you back again. All right, go for it.
How long do we have?
Like 3 minutes.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
Just keep an eye on the chat. I'll call you back.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, they're coming back. Also,
All right, did we get everyone? Yeah, it looks like it. Okay, cool. Ooh, tough getting people back. Must be good stories happening. Okay. Oh, there goes. Much. So final iteration of it is just going to take a minute or two to take the story that you've already got to the millionth degree story, and you're going to put it in the first person point of view from that person that you have, your character you have. So my name is whatever. It used to be like this in the village until one day, and now, because of that, whatever you've come to. You've already got the story, so this shouldn't take too long, but just as a little group, just go through the story a little bit of what that sounds like and sound it out loud together. So again, same thing, just a couple minutes, and then we'll come back. Make sense? Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
All right, back to the groups. Ham radios. Return to main room. All right.
I think we came up with a diet pill idea in our discussion.
You came up with what?
I think we came up with a killer idea for a diet pill.
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way. What a good use.
All right, well, hold on, because I'm going to get you to share it. All right.
That'll be the third Nobel Prize that a guy wins.
Wow, the things that we came up with in this brainstorming session. Who would have thought 3 Nobel Prizes came out of it? All right. How was the process? Anything that you guys noticed as we went through iterative steps? Any thoughts? Observations?
It is entertaining and thrilling to see each one's unique imagination, what direction it takes in, and how the next one tags along. And it, on the outside, it might look as a continuous loop. But it was amazing spine, the way it flowed. And it does not always go that way, but it did flow really. Yeah. And that's what marveled me was we were able to catch on to the tail end and make it much better and much better.
Yeah. What did it do to switch it to the first person point of view in the end? Did that change anything for you?
That got me involved, much more involved, even though it's both just improv. I was much more in it. I found things flowed nicely.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah.
Clarity. Sorry.
Good.
A little bit more clarity because it was yourself. You had to think it a little bit more.
Change the order in which we had to tell the story, and obviously the shift in the POV was it meant we had to edit some parts of the story out and elaborate other parts.
All right, great. All right, so now the fun time, sharing time. Ooh, which I'm sure you figured was coming at some point. All right, we got 2 stories, and whatever you have is fine. Obviously, this is a very low stakes scenario, so wherever it is, and it doesn't matter if it even doesn't match fully what you just discussed in the breakout rooms, but who's willing to give it a go? Need one person from each group.
I'll jump.
All right, Cal, let's hear it.
Let me tell you about the time. My name is Pierre, by the way. Let me tell you about the time that I cured leukemia. The pharmaceutical company that I was working for in, thank you, that I was working for in Paris, we were consistently sending researchers out to the Amazon to find this very rare plant. And we would send researchers out, and it's possible they found it, but they never came back out of the jungle. So again and again, researchers go out, they never come back. And now it's my turn. And of course, I'm terrified. But I'm the next researcher up. What I've heard is that there is this sort of little scrappy village in the middle of nowhere that they're going to drop me off in, and then I have to go hiking for a few days into the middle of nowhere to find this very rare plant. I got on my multiple planes to get to this tiny little village, but what I find is a very beautiful, affluent, modern village and a massive structure that is selling ham radios and abundance of tourists everywhere hiking through the jungle. I don't think much of it, so I buy a ham radio because why not? I'm here, and I go hiking through the jungle. So days out, I realized that whatever maps I had and my predecessors had don't add up. And now I have no idea where I am. But as luck has it, I do find my specimen. But now I'm in the middle of the jungle here with nowhere to go. I'm totally lost and turned around. However, I do have my ham radio. And not only do I have my ham radio, but when I call out to help, there's an entire chorus of tourists and locals all on this ham radio network that are able to come find me and help me out of the forest with my specimen to get me back to Paris, where we complete the cure for leukemia.
Fabulous. That's definitely worthy of a Nobel Prize. All right, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. All right, Samosa Group.
All right, we got 3 parts.
3 parts. All right.
Who's starting?
I believe Sashin's got started this one.
Okay. So I'm Jake. I'm not from State Farm, but from San Francisco. And this one time I was browsing, walking down the street looking for some Peruvian Italian food. And amidst the street, I found this tiny little thing which was obstructing traffic. And since I was driving a food truck to prevent traffic congestion, but surprisingly, they were at full capacity. So I took to my friend's house in the outskirts of the city, and we stored it at his backyard, and we then plugged it in and realized there was a big surprise. It could make pierogies. And then
We didn't even know what pierogies were at the time. These dough balls kept falling out. And my friend says, Jake, these are such a good, they're warm, like it was a cold winter's day and they were keeping our hands warm and you could smell it. It smelled just like delicious dough. And when we opened it up, there was cheese and potato, and it took a while. We were sniffing it and we tested it. We didn't want to eat it at first because it just came out of this machine. But when we did taste it, it was rich and it was creamy. And we just, as we were eating, they kept on coming out, these pierogies, as we call them. And we started grabbing them and just giving them out to people because they were keeping our hands warm and they were just so nice and doughy. So we were just giving them to everyone on the street. We were throwing them. The dogs were eating them. The dogs were so happy. Everyone was happy on the street. And pass.
Awesome. And then we decided, should we keep this a secret to ourselves or should we start sharing? And we decided, why not? Let's just see how many pierogies we can get out of this thing. And then we said, why don't we just run a worldwide campaign? Anyone who wants a pierogi will get one. Regardless of where you were, just send us a letter, send us a message. And yeah, that's all you have to do. And sure enough, maximum a week later, you get a pierogi for free. And then when we started seeing the amount, where you realize that these pierogies, they would always stay warm, like regardless of how long they stayed, how far we sent them to Kenya, and we send them to the US, and we send them to Australia. Just regardless of where we sent them to, they'd always stay warm, unless the pierogi knew, and we don't know how it knew, but unless the person was greedy, in which case, once it touched their hands, it would just crumble. It would just fall through their fingers. And yeah, that's our story.
Another great worthy Nobel Prize. All right, wonderful. Thanks guys for sharing that. All right, so obviously we went a little bit into the ridiculous realm with these, and that was part of my intention, of course. I wanted it to whoosh, but let's bring it back a little bit. And so my question is for you guys, using the sort of theory and technique, if you will, that we just did with this, how can this be applicable to an organization such as this one, which is designed for impact? How do you think, not just for this one, but similar types of organizations, however you want to think of the question, but how do you think this can be used? Think of the type of people that you're speaking to, the type of people who maybe don't know you exist, the type of people that maybe want your services and don't even know that they want it yet. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was, Marina and I were just talking about this a few moments ago. I think we started this conversation a few moments ago as well. It's the quick conversation about show me the numbers and give me the bullet points and those sort of things. What I'm finding in my world is that what we're doing is we're sanitizing the complexity and the chaos of the world out of the conversation when we go to these very high level bulleted summaries. And what I really want to do is bridge the gap of, I can't just throw everybody into the deep end, but I do want them to feel it a little bit. And so there's got to be some sort of runway of, I can't get you into the mess, but I need you to understand the mess a little bit. And it's not as clean as just 3 bullets on 2 slides.
Yeah, and to put it in one word, I'd say emotion would be it. You've removed the emotion. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I think it's interesting, like you shared that quote about Steve Jobs in terms of the storyteller is the most powerful person in the room, because they almost like illustrate the vision and the values and things. And I think that's something really interesting, like when I'm sharing stories about design for impact, that I really get the idea across what the values that we stand for as a group, and that we want to make a difference in the world. Not just talk about making a difference, but we genuinely want to help people. Yeah, I think that's stood out to me.
Great. Yeah. Missions and value statements is something that I generally laugh at because most of them say nothing. They just use a bunch of words like excellence. And I don't know who doesn't strive for excellence. Do you really need that in your mission statement? But a lot of them don't say anything. They're missing some sort of core. What does that value mean? There's an adage of show, don't tell in storytelling. Telling is, oh, we strive for excellence. Showing is demonstrating an example of a time when you did show excellence. So show, don't tell. So yeah. Any other thoughts about how this can be applicable to an organization like this?
Just joining in the last few sessions, it's just fun and engaging, and I think especially in a Zoom world, just that alone is valuable. People want to be hearing stories. People want to show up for that if it's going to be fun, and that has its own inherent value.
Yeah, definitely. It's more engaging. It's going to try to keep people's attention, especially on Zoom. Going to keep people's attention more than a bunch of PowerPoint bullets. So yeah, some things that I'll invite you to consider is somebody who doesn't know what UX is. How can you use storytelling to show it to them? Rather than the 12-step model, what's another way, similar to what we've been doing, that you can express it? Somebody who wants to know how design, something like UX design, could be used in a nonprofit way. How can you explain that to them? You know how in the example the sort of scenario, pardon, that we did of using a village, if you were to bring UX design to that village, what could that look like? And how can you use that to explain to someone the importance of UX? Just some thoughts to let them percolate in your heads about different ways that storytelling can be used. Now, of course, this is applicable to anything really in life, no matter whether it's UX we're talking about or other jobs or other interests or really anything that you have going on where you want to communicate with people. Storytelling is influence. It's getting people listening and paying attention. And that's what all those celebrities that I showed you in the slides earlier on all had in common. They were all influencers. They were all affecting the world around them, and they did it with their words, whether they were a storyteller or not. I'm sure none of you would have thought I was going to bring Steve Jobs out as a storyteller, but definitely. And so last thing is my homework for you. We've got a next session next week. And so my homework for you, if you choose to come back, if this was captivating enough to keep you wanting more, is to think about and come up with 2 stories. One story is your personal why story. And you can use the one you were working with earlier. Maybe it's a different one, but I'm going to ask you to gravitate more towards this organization, Design for Impact. If you want to, you don't have to. I shouldn't say you, I'm not going to say you must. In the context of this realm, so I'll say since you're here with Design for Impact, something in that vein. It doesn't have to be this itself, but something related. So why it's important to you, why you've chosen to do it, why you've chosen to be part of this organization, why, if it connects to your career path, something along those lines. But find a good why story that you'd be willing to share with an outside audience. And the second story is more along the lines of what we did in this last half, which is an example story, a demonstration. So when I told you my story about that woman with brain cancer, that was my showing, not telling. I was showing you the impact that the passion of mine can have. That's why I brought that story out. It wasn't just random. I had a reason for bringing that up. And using the same idea of this fantasy-ish scenario that we just did, how do you have a real story, a real equivalent of these fun stories we just made? How can you demonstrate to somebody who's never heard of UX before a moment in your life that shows why it was valuable? Again, it doesn't have to be UX. Since we're with this organization, something somewhat related, we'll go with loosely related, however you want to interpret that. But yeah, see if you can find a moment, something that demonstrates why and how it's impactful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay, I guess there's just last thing is if anyone has any questions before we end it. No, you guys are good? Okay.
Mike, you had mentioned one thing, that the why and the subtle how. When you started off, what was the subtle how? Is that with the story?
Are you sorry? You're asking about what the 2 stories were?
No, you said that it's not just about the why, but also the subtle how.
In the second story you're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure the exact words I use, but the idea is something that demonstrates it, something that you can think of it as an example, right? If somebody asks you, what you're doing and the impact it has, like what difference does it make what you do, right? So for my example, I told you why I love storytelling. I gave you the sort of the reason why I got into it and the thing that sparked that sort of bang moment. the before, bang, after kind of thing. But then the second story I told you was more about its impact. It was about the result. And I showed it not by using facts and figures of, oh, I've learned this many stories and I've told stories to this many people and I've hosted this many workshops. I didn't tell you any of that. Instead, I gave you a demonstration through story of here's how it played out. And I used emotion to get you into it as well. So it's like the alternative to the PowerPoint slides that we were talking about earlier. Instead of having your PowerPoint deck, I'm asking you for a story that achieves a similar kind of a purpose, but from an emotional angle instead of a logical, pragmatic angle.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
No. Yeah. That's what I wrote it down because it's loud around my house. Something on those lines. Driving story to explain it.
Yeah, it's like a demonstration. And you can, this is also open to interpretation a little bit, right? Because each of you have your own interests and things you're working on. If you have a story that relates in a different way but the idea is to use story to make a point here. To show, to bring out the emotion of why you're doing what you're doing, not your backstory. The first story is the backstory kind of one. And the second one is like more of an example.
Awesome. And to help us, what I might do is I might create a group on Slack so we can like share and prompt each other to remember we're working on it so that we don't.
That's a good idea. And then what we'll do next session is share them. And for anyone who wants, I can give you feedback on things to add, things that could be improved, things like that. That part will be optional. I won't. I'm good though. I won't be harsh on you. The point isn't to be harsh. The point is to get you thinking about a different way of presenting this kind of information.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, Mike. That was awesome. That was brilliant. It was great to, learn from you and not just learn by hearing, but learn by practicing as well, it was great. So thanks so much for sparing the time, and we can't wait to the next session.
All right. Thank you everyone for your participation.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks everyone.